Okay, in this video I'm going to be talking about some really key current things that are going on relating to Australia and the world economy, which is the main goal in this outcome is to understand what that means. So first things first, you may have heard of the term external stability. It's no longer in the study guide having knowledge of what external stability is, but just in terms of, so you understand it for background knowledge, when we're referring to the term external stability, we're talking about Australia's ability to meet or service our international financial obligations. So it's about our ability to essentially service our debt, and it has three components to it. We aim for a sustainable current account deficit. So we want to keep our current account deficit generally below 5% of our GDP. We want to have a serviceable level of net foreign debt, which means that it's not too high that we can't pay the interest on it, and we generally want that below 60%. And we want a relatively stable dollar. So it's not too high that's hurting our exports, but not too low, which is limiting our ability to pay for overseas goods. So we generally want a relatively stable dollar, not going up and down too much. At the moment, in terms of our achievement of that objective, our net foreign debt is currently around 56% of our GDP, so just below the 60%, which is theoretically a good thing, even though that equates to around $1,000 billion. Our current account deficit for 2017 was around 2.6% of our GDP, so well below 5%, which is a positive thing, and our Australian dollar is around 74 US cents. It's important to recognise that the current account deficit is not something you pay off. You can't pay off a CAD because it's not talking about a level of debt. It's recording the difference between money flowing in and out of an economy in a given year or in a given 3 months. And I'm going to show you how that works now. So here's a long graph with lots of different things in it. We've got the credits in the current account here, your debits in your current account, the current account deficit or surplus, your CAFA surplus or deficit, your net foreign liabilities, the impact on net foreign liabilities in that year, and your total net foreign liabilities. So in year one, the credits and debits is essentially recording the difference between spending and earning in a given year. So in this year here, debits have exceeded credits by 20, so we have a current account deficit of 20. That means we have a a capital and financial account surplus of 20, because they will always balance each other, so in all these here. And that means that capital inflow exceeded capital outflow by 20 in that first year. And because we are borrowing and selling more assets, that means that our total impact on net foreign liabilities is that will increase by 20 as well. So if this was the first year we were in existence for our economy, at the end of the first year we would have a net foreign liabilities of 20. At the end of the second year, again we have a current account deficit, this time of 30, which means the CAFA is in surplus of 30, and the impact on the net foreign liabilities is that goes up by 30 as well, because again capital inflow exceeded capital outflow. So the bigger the size of this CAFA surplus, the more our net foreign liabilities go up. So in the second year, our total net foreign liabilities have gone up by 30, which gives us a total net foreign liabilities of 50, which is debt plus equity. In year 3, you can see we've got a significantly smaller CAD. It's down to -5, which means, again, this time we have a CAFA surplus of 5. So the current account deficit has fallen compared to the previous year, but because we're still spending more than we're earning, the net foreign liabilities will still grow. Our net foreign liabilities at the end of the year have still grown by 5. Yes, the current account deficit has fallen, but if we're still in a deficit, then our net foreign liabilities are still growing. So whenever we run a deficit, this total will continue to increase because the CAF will always be in surplus. That will always impact net foreign liabilities, causing it to go up, and therefore net foreign liabilities go up. In the last year, we finally run a current account surplus, which we don't do in Australia, but if hypothetically we run a current account surplus of 5, that means we actually have a deficit in the capital and financial account, which means the capital outflow is now exceeding capital inflow, and that's when we'll have a decrease in our net foreign liabilities. So it's only in the last year when we have a current account surplus that our net foreign liabilities go down. If we just have a smaller current account deficit like we did in year 3, then it's just going to lead to our net foreign liabilities growing at a slower rate. So when the current account deficit is in deficit, net foreign liabilities are always growing. In year 3, we ran a smaller deficit, but net foreign liabilities still increased by 5 because we still spent more than we earned. When the CAFA is in surplus, then when the surplus in the CAFA gets smaller, so here in year 3 it was a lot smaller than year 2, that just means net foreign liabilities are growing slower. When the CAFA surplus increases, it means net foreign liabilities are growing faster. When we run a current account surplus, CAFA is in deficit, and that's when net foreign liabilities will go down. Net foreign debt does not need to go up when we run a current account deficit because we may decide to sell off our assets instead. The relationship between the current account and the CAFA funds the current account. That's the relationship between the two of them. And whenever we run a current account deficit, net foreign liabilities increase. And then if you're explaining the relationship, you need to do it both ways. Whenever we have an increase in net foreign liabilities, it then leads to a bigger current account deficit because we have to pay interest and profits and dividends back to other overseas countries, depending on whether it's debt or equity that we've issued. So you need to understand that relationship. You need to understand these trends. Have a look. Keep looking at the table if you're still struggling with that impact and the relationship between different variables. Again, this is showing you it graphically. So you can see in the last year, the current account balance has actually increased a little bit. It did decrease for a while. And the capital inflow will always equate to, so this capital inflow or net capital inflow is inflow minus outflow. So the bigger the current account deficit. So if you look at this point in here in 2002 to 2007, that's when we're having the most capital inflow come in because we need to fund the deficit, and it's a bigger deficit, so we're funding it more. So these pink and blue lines will be higher when we have a bigger deficit, and then when we have a lower deficit like we do here, they're not as big because we don't need as much capital inflow. The pink represents when we have debt, so we're going into debt. The blue represents when we are selling off our assets. In these years here, we actually purchased more foreign assets than we sold, and that's why net foreign equity is negative. If you look at this graph here, as you can see, whenever capital inflow exceeds net capital inflow increases, our total net foreign liabilities will grow. So this is always above the 0%. This is just recording what's happening in a given year. And when they are growing, it means we're issuing debt or we're selling off assets, and our net foreign liabilities continue to grow. As you can see, equity makes up a very negligible part of our overall net foreign liabilities, and at the moment it's below 0, which signifies that we have more foreign assets than foreigners have in our assets, or we have a higher share of foreign shares and foreign properties and foreign businesses than they do in Australia. But the key thing to remember is whenever we have a CAFA surplus, it will increase our net foreign liabilities. This is a percentage of our GDP, so it's not in dollar terms. That's why it's not completely the same. But the dollar figure will always increase when we have a CAFA surplus. The bigger the CAFA surplus, the more our net foreign liabilities will grow, or the faster our net foreign liabilities will grow. So as you can see with this graph here, this is in dollar terms. So you can see our current account balance is what this is recording. That's the black line is the current account balance. So you can see the current account is going into a slightly bigger deficit in the last year, even though it went to a smaller deficit in dollar terms in those years. So in billions of dollars, it's gone from around $5 billion to $15 billion, but back here it was a $25 billion deficit. The reason for that, even though interest has always been negative, so the net primary income because of the interest debits, the balance of trade has suffered in recent years as a result of higher import spending and the slight reduction in commodity prices over the last year. So this is our net international investment position. This is equity plus debt, and you can see that's continuing to grow with debt at about $900 to $950 billion. Sorry, debt's the checkered line, and equity just below 0, which means that our overall net foreign liabilities, the black line, or net international investment position, is just below the dotted line. So as you can see, the black line is just below the dotted line always because our equity is negative, and that's why net foreign debt exceeds net foreign liabilities. Okay, and a couple of last things about the current account. The reasons for the lower CAD, so during these times here when we had a lower CAD compared to what it was back here, was because of strong export volumes in Australia, a higher terms of trade, with the main things increasing credits, and then the main things decreasing debits were things like low wage pressures, so we weren't importing as much because, helped to reduce our imports, and the low Australian dollar was another one. And the low global interest rates, which means we haven't had to pay as much interest on our CAD in the net primary income account. And the lower dollar has boosted demand for our exports and led to more credits as well. The higher CAD this year has been because of the slight fall in commodity prices. So the CAD has increased, this blue line. Weak productivity growth, so a structural factor that's hurting the CAD at the moment, a structural factor. So what I mean by that is an ongoing problem, is our weak productivity growth, which is causing higher costs of production. That's a structural factor because it's not related to the business cycle. Trade dumping is another one. So when overseas countries try and dump their products on our shores, that leads to more import spending, and that can cause a higher current account deficit as well. In the future, it may also hurt the CAD with the trade sanctions that's going on in America. So that will probably reduce both imports and exports. We won't be able to export as much if Trump puts trade sanctions on our raw materials and things like that. But we will probably import less as well as we sort of restrict some of the things that they can bring into Australia. Okay, so some of the things impacting the CAD more generally, low wage growth reduces the CAD, stronger overseas growth is always good for reducing the CAD, Lower disposable incomes because we don't have as much money to spend, so we don't import as much. Strong productivity growth always makes us more competitive. In terms of right now, the main factors lowering the CAD is the relatively low Australian dollar, strong export volumes, and low wage growth, whereas the factors increasing the CAD are the lower savings rates and the decrease in the terms of trade in recent months. Is the current account deficit a problem? It's not necessarily a problem. It depends on whether we can fund it or not. So running a current account deficit has its benefits because it allows us to spend more than we earn, and therefore we can enjoy a higher standard of living than we would without access to these imports. But it becomes a problem when we can't fund it anymore. So if it leads to a fall in our credit rating, that can mean it's harder for us to attract foreign funds. It can lead to higher interest rates on those foreign funds, and that reduces our ability to grow and invest in the size of our economy. Increased borrowing can also have negative implications for the current account in the long term because we have to pay debits through net primary income, and all of that has issues for increasing the size of the CAD. So it can be a problem if it leads to a reduction in our credit rating, if it leads to more debits in the net primary income account, and can also lead to contractionary budgetary policies. So the government may want to slow down spending, so slow down spending on imports, and then it can become a problem as well. Thank you.